Now, unfortunately, one of the major reasons why science projects costs can blow out is administration and bureaucracy. There's a very common joke, my apologies if you've heard this before, talking about the discovery of a new element, administratium. The joke comes in many variants, but it's usually something like this. The heaviest element known to science was recently discovered by physicists. This element, tentatively named administratium, has no protons or electrons and thus has an atomic number of 0. However, it does have 1 neutron, 125 assistant neutrons, 75 vice neutrons, and 111 assistant vice neutrons. This gives it an atomic mass of 312. Since it has no electrons, administratium is inert. However, it can be detected chemically as it impedes every reaction it comes into contact with. According to the discoverers, a minute amount of administratium caused one reaction to take over 4 days to complete, when it would normally occur in less than 1 second. Administratium has a normal half-life of approximately 3 years, at which time it does not actually decay, but instead undergoes a reorganization in which assistant neutrons, vice neutrons, and assistant vice neutrons exchange places. Some studies have shown the atomic weight actually increases after each reorganization. I mean, a bit sad, but the basic idea is that administration, bureaucracy, permits can dramatically increase the time taken to do science and the cost of doing science. Examples. In the nuclear section we talked about how the double break rule, the nuclear power plant has to be able to withstand having breaks in 2 places in the same pipe simultaneously, which can basically never happen in the real world, but that blows out the prices because it requires enormous design changes. Environmental reviews. Anything that's going to be built now has to review showing it's not going to hurt the environment more than a certain amount, but these reviews are becoming, in some countries, incredibly cumbersome. There was a road tunnel in the UK which required 300,000 pages of environmental reports before construction could start. 300,000 pages, that's like thousands of books worth of information. How can that amount of information possibly be useful in terms of deciding whether something's going to be safe to build or not? And of course that means it takes years and large numbers of people and money, and so maybe people just don't build the bridge, don't build the tunnel. It's going to cost too much, it's going to take too long. At the time of writing, in mid-late 2024, SpaceX is waiting to launch its next launch of the Starship spacecraft. The rocket's been ready for weeks now, but they're held up by administration bureaucracy. Their previous launches have been approved, but this new launch is going to have a slightly different flight trajectory, which means the sonic boom pattern will be a bit different on the ground, and a metal ring that goes in between the 2 stages will drop somewhere else in the ocean. Because this is going to be different, technically it triggers an environmental review, and because it's going to the ocean it has to go to the Fisheries Department. So the Federal Aviation Authority referred it to the Fisheries Department, who have to now investigate whether dropping this ring a different place in the ocean is going to cause problems which wasn't a different sonic boom. All of which is going to take months and means that SpaceX has to keep paying salaries during those months, and therefore it's costing millions of dollars. Perhaps not too bad by itself, but if every single step in your research project is slowed down and made more expensive by these sort of, in this case, fairly meaningless bureaucracy, part of the trouble is that often the bureaucrats don't have enough resources to analyse these things quickly. And this can cause real harm. A classic example is all the delays in approving COVID-19 vaccines. Now, sure, you want to make sure that a new vaccine is safe, but at the time they were doing all these approvals and studies, tens of thousands of people were dying right away that could have been stopped from dying had the vaccine be put in their arms. So sure, there's a risk of putting it out, but that risk was clearly far less than the tens of thousands who were dying because you were being very careful. Now, why do we have this tendency for bureaucracy, endless increases in bureaucracy? The basic mechanism is every time something goes wrong, a new rule is introduced. So, for example, let's say someone is hurt in a clinical trial, a new rule. Let's say there's a new accident, there'll be a new rule. Let's say someone cheats on their budgeting, then there'll be a new rule. Or if there's a scientific fraud, there'll be a new rule to stop it. So whenever anything goes wrong, people say, okay, we'll fix it, we'll put a new rule in. But they never go back and take away the old rules. So some rules are very good ones. They reflect really big risks, but some ones are very small and reflect very small risks. And people don't tend to do a cost-benefit analysis because there's always a cost of every rule, whether it's the cost of having delays, of needing administrators to check, having the scientists have to put out documentation to prove they're adhering to something, or maybe doing something another way to make sure it avoids this whole procedure. And so you should really do a cost-benefit. Yeah, okay, there's a risk, this is a real risk, but maybe it's a very rare risk and it wouldn't be that bad if it went wrong, so maybe it's just not worth the cost. But that sort of cost-benefit analysis is very, very rarely done. Another issue is that very often when something goes wrong, it has what are called concentrated costs but dilute benefits. So for example, let's say someone builds a giant wind turbine near your house, it'll spoil your view, bad for you. But it will produce renewable energy and therefore help save the world from global warming, benefiting everybody. But the benefit from someone living 1,000 kilometres away from this is very, very small, because it's only going to be a very small part of solving the whole world's problem. If you add up those small benefits for all the billions of people in the world, that's probably very much worth doing. But of course, a person living 1,000 kilometres away is not going to vote against the government because they are not going to develop this program that's going to very, very slightly decrease greenhouse emissions. Whereas a person whose house is going to have this giant thing over it is really aggrieved and is going to criticise it. So this generally means that for almost any change it's going to make some people a bad effect, but there's a few people who are going to be very badly affected, and a large number of people who will get gentle gains who probably are not that fussed about it. Classic example is building airports. It's almost impossible to build an airport anywhere in the world now because people who live near it are going to be affected by the noise. Overall, the airport is a huge economic boon to the country, allowing people to go on holidays and get air freight, these economically enormously valuable things, but that's spread over a large number of people, whereas the cost, the noise, is spread over a few carefully identifiable people who will fight like crazy. And all this has meant it's virtually impossible to build new airports. Then you've got to look at what are the incentives for a bureaucrat. Generally speaking, if you're a junior bureaucrat in some authority, you're rewarded for following the rules. Can you show you followed the rules? And also, if something goes wrong, if you are regulating a drug and a drug kills someone, you will get punished. Whereas if you regulate a drug so much it doesn't get built and people die because they didn't get the drug, you don't get punished. So you're not punished for the costs you inflict on other people, whereas you are punished if something goes wrong. So your incentives are always to be a bit too strict and always to follow the rules, because that way your career is safe, and if other people have to pay and therefore new drugs are not developed, new rockets are not developed, new science doesn't happen, costs blow out, that's not your problem. And also there's often multiple jurisdictions. In Australia often things can be the council or the federal government or the state government can all have laws which often contradict. Different government departments might have different rules. You might have to go through 5 or 6 government departments, all of which can blow the costs sky high. All in all, this tends to add up to the idea of a vetocracy, that things don't get done if anybody objects. And the trouble is, someone will always object to anything. It doesn't matter how good it is, there will always be someone who will object. And that often means that things just don't happen. But in practice, it often means that these people are bought off. So you're trying to build a bridge and people object. Well, you have to say, well, we'll have a fund to help and we'll do a really careful environmental study and we'll make sure it's a especially quiet bridge and we'll make it extra high so that boats can still get under it, or whatever it might be, all of which also blows out the price. So, administration and bureaucracy, it's a major problem. Some people argue that in countries like Australia and the US today, it actually is grinding everything to a halt.